Hello everyone, welcome to this Blender tutorial. Today I'm going to show you my take on the subsurface skin effect from Video Copilot. First of all, let me say that I'm not fully pleased with my results. They are far from perfect and there's lots of room for improvement. Still, I believe that, or I hope that the techniques I'm going to show you will be helpful to someone out there. And maybe one of you can even improve on this and make the effect better. Okay, let's head into Blender. First of all, make sure that your frame rate settings and your resolution are as you want it. And we're going to work in the Blender internal render engine. Switch over to the movie clip editor and let's open our source footage. This footage can be found on Video Copilot and I'll put a link to that into the description. The last frame is 61, it's a very short video. So set the end frame to 61. And the basis for this effect is to track kind of this plane. If you look at the side of his face as a plane, in After Effects, in the original tutorial, they used the Mocha tracker to track his face as a plane and then attached all their images and the mask to that plane. Now, unfortunately, Blender does not have Mocha's abilities, and I tried to make it work with the plane track feature, but it didn't. So the best way I could come up with was to use object tracking. To do this, first of all, here on the right side under objects, we have to create another object because we don't want a camera track. As you can see here, we don't want to solve the camera motion, but the object motion. And to do this, we need to create a new object. That's all. So with the object selected, that's very important, we can create a tracking point. And I want to see the search area as well. Scale it up a bit. I believe that his eyebrow might be a good tracking point. And then, since I'm on the last frame, we're going to track backwards, which is either pressing this button or, because it's a rather short sequence, just 61 frames, I'm going to try to go through this frame by pressing Alt and back, the back arrow key. This way I can see for each frame. Let me press L to lock the view to this tracking point. This way I can see on each frame if the tracking marker goes terribly off. And we can see right here why this is kind of difficult footage to track for Blender. His face goes out of focus and there are no real good tracking points on there. I believe I can. And since I have the setting to keyframe, I believe it tries to match the last keyframe I've set. And the last one I've set was on this frame. And his eyebrow has moved quite a bit, so I better create a new keyframe by moving this slightly. And there it jumps. That's why I like to see exactly what I'm doing frame by frame. And we don't have to track the final the complete clear before. We don't have to track it all because we only need the object track from the point he turns his head around. Like in this area from, I'd say, around 14 to, or maybe even, we just need tracking points from around 14 till the last frame 61. And you have to have at least 8 tracking points to create an object motion track. I'm going to load up a file where I've already created 8 of these tracking points, so I'm not going to bore you. As you can see, I've tracked his eyebrows, the tip of his nose, this kind of hairline here, and then the edge of his mouth. It was quite a bit of work, but and as you can see, I have tracking points from, I ended up with tracking points in the area from frame 23 till frame 61. And that's why I've set my keyframes right here from 24 till 61. Those are the keyframes from which the solver will try to compute how the object, in this case his head, is moving. And to get a better track, we have to match the focal length of our virtual camera under camera data with that of the real camera. Unfortunately, I don't know what kind of focal length was used in this scene, but I'm guessing it's a longer lens because the background is very much out of focus. So I guess it's definitely longer than 50, and I've tried out some values and ended up using 85. So set your focal length and experiment with it a bit. Remember to set your keyframes and then create an object, solve the object motion. I end up with a solve error of 4.4, which is really quite bad, but it works since we only need to roughly follow the rotation of his head. It will work. Now we have solved our object motion. Let's go into 3D view. With the camera selected, we have to, under constraints, we have to add a camera solver, and this way now we are going to see these empties for the tracking points and how they move around. That is the representation of the object that we have. And when you do this, you might notice, you might see that the empties, the tracking points in the 3D view are too close to the camera or too far away. And you can fix that in the reconstruction panel by setting the object scale. You see, if you slide this around, you can bring them roughly to where you believe the object that you tracked would be in relation to the camera. It's really a lot of guessing work here, but can't be helped. So next I'm going to maximize the 3D view, add a background image to camera view, movie clip, and it's already set. We can see those points from a certain frame, from frame 23 on, they will stick to his face. And now let's add a cube. This cube is what we're going to use. We're going to add the object solver constraint to this and set the camera to camera and the object to the object that we have solved. Now it kind of sticks to the movement, but it's placed completely strange and scaled wrongly. Let me scale this down and move it till it matches up with these tracking points roughly. Bring it down a bit, and then from object view, scale it down even further. And now if we play to this, so I try to align this cube roughly with his head. And I need quite some. A little trick might help if I'm going to go into edit mode, select this face, cursor to selected, and set the origin to the 3D cursor. Now this cube will rotate around this point when I rotate it. And I'm going to set this origin point. I'm just going to say as a convention, this is going to be, or should be, where his nose is. And it's not aligned properly. It looks right from this view, but from top view we can see it's not lined up quite correctly. To fix that, in reconstruction mode I select his nose, or the tracker that I have on his nose, and set this as the origin. Now it has moved the origin of this cube and we can see from a certain frame on, the cube kind of follows the rotation of his head, and that is exactly what we want. I'm going to close this view down here and just now the next thing we want is to have this kind of glowing, to create this kind of texture that will make his skin look like it's glowing, and we're going to apply this texture to a simple plane. I add the plane and move it like so. And try to align it with these tracking points. As best as I can. So This looks okay, and with the plane selected and shift right click on this cube, and now I parent the plane to our cube. The cube is aligned with his face, and now we can see from frame 23 on the plane seems to be sticking to his cheek, to the side of his face. Now we add a material, and I'm going to call it Subsurface. Blender render engine. Let me delete it. New material. Subsurface. And I want it to be shadeless, completely white material. And to this I add, first of all, a cloud texture. Adjust it a little bit. Set it to color. And now let me move the, first of all, this object here, this cube that we've aligned with his head, that's just going to be a helper. We don't need to render it, so I move it to the last layer. That's funny, why don't I see anything? Ah, I had the wrong object selected. Of course, the world should be black for what I'm trying to do. So set the background to black. And now we have this plane, which will follow the rotation of his face. And if we go into the node editor, use backdrop, we add our movie clip, and if we use a color, no, not a color, a dodge node, we can see where this plane appears, his skin will be lighter. And if we use RGB curves, and I make this more red, take out blue and give it a slight contrast curve like so, and maybe even make it brighter. And then we get this kind of glowy effect on his face. And back in 3D view, to improve this even further, with the subsurface material selected, we add another texture, which I will call image 1. This will be an image texture, and we open, let's say, this image. Let me get into textured view, shading, GSL. And we can see this is kind of the vein pattern, and it will align to his face like this. But we don't want to mix it, we want to multiply. So where it's black, the veins will sort of cover up this pattern right here. And we can try to rearrange this even by scaling it down like this and moving the pattern till we have something that we like. Image mapping. Let me see how this looks. And I'm going to add another image because Andrew Kramer has provided 2 images, so we might as well use them. And I need the white veins, and because here we want to keep the white parts, we don't set it to multiply but to subtract. And again, we can move it around like this and add some try to move it around, play around with these values a bit until you get something you like. Now the next thing, of course, we don't want this pattern to cover up his whole face. So what are we going to do? We need a mask. We could use the masking editor, but I'm going to use a different method. With the, let's go back to wireframe mode. With this plane selected, Shift D to duplicate, and then move it to a second layer. Remove this material and create a new one that I will call mask. This should also be shadeless and black. And it should have a image texture. I also call mask image or movie. And for this we're going to use projection painting by creating a new image, clicking here, untitled, black, that's all okay. And now if we switch to edit mode with everything selected and type in Smart UV Project and reopen our untitled image, we can see this image that we've created has the UV coordinates, and of course we need to change the image texture that we've set to use these UV coordinates that we just created, and to use this untitled image that we have created. And now what we can do is switch to textured mode, to texture paint mode, and now we can simply draw a mask. Isn't this working? You might want to deactivate occlude culling and this, and now we can draw the mask shape that we want more or less directly to his face. We're not going And when you're pleased with what it looks like, important step, save an image, save a copy of this image. You really don't want to lose your work if something crashes, so when you've created your mask, save it. And now we create a new render layer that we call mask. The first one will only have the first layer, and we've moved the mask to the second layer. And now, if we go to the node editor, we use the mask render layer, and of course I should select both layers before rendering. So we have this mask, and with a color mix node with multiply, we can now restrict this vein pattern to the area that we've masked out. And of course the mask would need some more work, but you can do that yourself. I guess you see the principle. But right now, another thing that we can do to improve this is with the image that has our cloud texture, we can in fact animate the cloud texture so that it moves a little bit by animating the offset. We create a keyframe on the first frame and just offset it in every direction a little bit, like so. And now over the course of this video, the cloud texture will animate a little bit. And we can look at it in the video sequence editor, but remember to turn off OpenGL shading. I have forgotten one important step. As you can see, I have added the movie clip, but I forgot to add a distortion node to scale it always to the render size that we are using. That's why my preview render didn't really work. And refresh the sequencer. And now if we catch this sequence into the RAM, we can see we don't see anything. Why is that? Default. Because once again I've forgotten to select this layer. And so back to video editing, refresh sequencer. We can see from the point that we've tracked it properly, the mask and this vein pattern sticks to his face. But naturally, before we have any tracking data, and I hope we can see this, this pattern is changing a little bit of the glow. But of course we don't want to have this visible on the first frames. We actually just need it from frame 20 or so. So in the node editor we can use one simple trick. We duplicate this multiply layer, and when we multiply with black, what will we get? Just a black image. But if we set the factor value to 1, we get the image that we want. So I set it to visible here, and should not be visible. Hover over this field and press I to insert a keyframe. And now this mask will become visible over the course of several frames. Let's see how that looks like. And of course, this is just really, I've really rushed through this because there was a lot to cover. That's why we get some frames where it is too far off his face and you could mask that out or tweak the mask that you've drawn on this shape to improve this further and get it exactly where you want it. But that's the basic. We have this skin pattern and it sort of follows his face. As I said, you can tweak that to make it look better, but the basic workflow is like this, and I hope this was useful to some of you. Happy blending. See you next time.